Hello, viewers. Welcome to this edition of Global Vibes. My guest today is James Wilkinson. James is the City of Thunder Bay's Indigenous Relations Liaison. James, thank you so much for your time, and we're so happy to have you with us here.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
And thank you for talking to us today about how or what non-Indigenous people can learn from Indigenous people.
Nice.
Thank you so much for this time.
Okay.
Let's start from the very beginning. What does your role entail?
My role as Indigenous Relations Liaison entails building and maintaining relationships in the community, fostering new ones, as well as really bolstering the ones that we have already that exist. We deal with everything from complaints to concerns to a lot of things dealing with Fort William First Nation because we're on their traditional territory. So if somebody wants to do any kind of exploration or kind of construction or anything like that, they usually contact us and we either are the go-between or we just help sort of facilitate that conversation. The other things we do, because we're a hub, we have a lot of connections with different communities around the area, like in the region of Northwestern Ontario. And we develop those relationships because a lot of their community members are here.
Yes.
So we find supports and services for them as well. And when we're doing different things in the community, we get feedback from them as to what supports that they need. And we do the best we can to help them with that. It entails a lot. We are, like I said, we are the hub. So there's a lot of people here.
True. And they come from various different purposes, right?
Yes.
There's medical, there is education, there's trades.
Yeah, exactly.
And how long back was this office, the Indigenous Relations Office, established at the city?
I believe it was established in 2008.
I see.
Yeah.
And how long have you been with the office?
I just started my second year in February.
Oh, this is your second?
Yeah, this is my second year in February. I've been in the
Nice.
community for 14 years doing a lot of work in the community.
Right.
And working with the corporation of the city. This is my first real stint as a city employee working in doing the same work.
And James, I do recall you once mentioning that you had to have a discussion or a dialogue with an elder before you accepted this position.
Yes.
Why was that?
Being here for 14 years has given me a very good perspective on sort of what's going on in the community, some of the issues that we have, some of the really strong points that we have. And because I've done work in the community and I've been doing work in the community, I'm very aware of our issues and the things that we need to work on, as well as things that we have improved on. That being said, it's a lot of work, and taking on this role is what I would call ground zero, because being sort of within the corporation and being the Indigenous Relations Liaison, you get a lot of questions and sometimes pushback from within the corporation for people who don't understand what's going on and why we have to change things, why we have to do things differently. You also get pushback from the community because the community is like, well, you need to change things and you need to do things differently.
There's a lot of expectations from both ends.
Yeah, a lot of expectations this way. And because I have that 14-year relationship, I've already developed that connection with the community. So people have no problem connecting me with either on social media or whatever, just saying, hey, you need to change this or you need to talk to this person about that. And it's just trying to sort of balance all that out. And when I talked to the elder, I was like, that's like a big responsibility, because essentially this role is a lot of the decisions that you make and the things that you try to change directly impact the health of our community, like Thunder Bay community, the Indigenous community, like everybody who's here. So you have to be really careful in the things that you do. And I told the audience, I don't know if I want that responsibility because that's a big deal. There's a lot of things going on in the community and it was established in 1970, and since the 1970s till now, there's a lot of things that have happened here.
Yeah.
So I said I didn't feel qualified to have that responsibility, and from a sort of overwhelming perspective, I didn't know that I wanted it. And it was explained to me that I am the person right now to be in this role because I have the relationship in the community. I understand the corporate structure. I'm the guy that sits at the table that can actually communicate sort of in everybody's language, so to speak.
Sure.
And again, from having the relationships, people are more apt to talk to me now than they would if I just dropped in one day and they said, okay, now I'm the new Indigenous Relations Liaison and tell me your problems, and because there's no relationship there, right? So now, when I finished talking with the elder, he just explained to me that because you are the person best suited for this role right now, that's why it's been handed to you. And it's not something that you have to handle alone. Like, I've been gifted sacred items over the last probably 2 years that I normally wouldn't have had.
Sure.
Right. So now it's like I'm getting support outside of just me
Your
personally,
community,
right?
yeah.
And I'm not doing this alone. The other element that he added was that there's a collective consciousness change within the corporation and within the community, so people are more willing to talk now. And that way, it's not me just sort of taking on that huge battle. It's actually just kind of being the person in the middle, going, "You need to talk, and you need to talk, and we need
Bring
to talk."
both together.
Yeah.
You're building relationships, you're nurturing relationships. James, you mentioned about sacred objects,
Yes.
and you're holding a feather.
Yeah.
Can you
This is
share the significance of that?
This is an eagle feather. I was directed by an elder last summer to go and find feathers. And I went on a search, and this is one of 3 that I found. And this has become my smudge feather, my talking feather. When I do ceremony, I usually use this feather. The significance for me for this eagle feather is it reminds me of my connection to the spirit world, to the culture, to who I am and the path that I walk. So the teaching that I got with the eagle feather when I'm sharing things like this is to speak in a good way, to walk in a good way, and not be afraid to tell the truth. And you can still do that in a compassionate
nice
and
way.
empathetic way. So.
And I also noticed that you did a smudge ceremony before we started here.
Yes, it's the teaching I got with the smudge ceremony was it helps me ground myself, it helps me to cleanse, and it helps put me in a good space. And it's usually what we use when we're having gatherings or events, etc. We start off with a smudge ceremony, and then we do an opening prayer. And I actually
Nice.
did my own prayer, and
Okay.
just ask for guidance and direction to handle this in a good way, and
Nice.
just be
Very
receptive to what's coming.
Thank you so much, James. And in a way, you have also kind of brought in a lot of spirituality
yes.
to this ambience. Thank you so much, James. James, we'll take a very short break. Dear viewers, stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hello, viewers. Welcome back. We're talking to James Wilkinson, the City of Thunder Bay's Indigenous Relations Liaison. James, tell me about your journey, your professional journey leading up to your current position.
Okay, I graduated college as a mature student in 2012. That was right around the time they started working on what's called the Wakamau Project. And that was a very important project about raising Indigenous awareness about the history and just kind of educating people on sort of what the reality of our shared history in Canada is.
And the project was called
The Wakamau.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
And so I was already doing work with the broadcast department with the college as an alumni. So I was helping, raising awareness with some Indigenous issues, as well as promoting artists who are in the region and in the community. And I ended up running a show there, and it was called Mino Bamatawazin, so the Good Life Show.
Okay.
And there sometimes we would have phone calls for people from the East Coast that would make Mi'kmaq, and they would share about residential school and some of the issues that are prevalent within the shared history of Canada.
This was a radio show.
Yes, it was a
already-
radio show that was done through the broadcasting department, and it was to help those students get experience in sort of like a live setting.
Nice.
So it was nice to be able to give back that way as well. And then when the Walk a Mile was actually officially launched, I believe we had probably 70 facilitators in the community. So it was something I was interested in doing, but they didn't really need me because they already had so many people. So I just kind of left that alone, and I focused on working with youth in the community. And then within a year, that number from 70 went down to, I believe, 5. And for different reasons. And because it went down to 5, I believed in the project, and I believed in that raising awareness and the importance of sharing that information in the community so that we can better understand each other and we can better come together as a community. So I talked to it was actually Aboriginal liaison at the time, and I talked to her, and her and I had been friends for a few years. And I said, I'd be willing to, come help you out and become a facilitator to make sure that this project doesn't die, because I have time to do that now. So I ended up becoming a Walk a Mile facilitator, and within the first year, I believe, we started training the police services. And they asked me, you're an experienced facilitator and you know this subject matter, so can you be, one of the key people to go in and help do that training session?
With the police?
Yeah, with the police services, right. So I ended up going in there and trained actually the majority of them on the Walk a Mile project. And then through that occasion, I was asked, can you come in and do the orientation for new hires and existing employees within the city? Because the Aboriginal Liaison's office at that time was only 2 people and it was really small. So they got overwhelmed and they didn't have time to do all the orientation and stuff. So I volunteered to do that. I did that for a little while, and then I actually became the key person to do that.
There you go.
And then, continuing to do work and raising awareness and other work in the community. And I believe right up until just before the pandemic, I was still doing work with the city in that role.
Okay.
And then I decided, as much as I enjoyed sort of working in the community, raising awareness and doing those things, my heart is working with youth and helping them build their own foundations, their own sense of self, identity, sense of purpose, etc. So I opted to go to one of the Indigenous high schools, and I worked there for almost 2 years during the pandemic, so that was just a totally different experience. And then I started working on a different project to help keep Indigenous high school students in school with proper support so that we had a better graduation rate. And while I was in the process of frameworking that, this position became available.
And so you moved.
And I was like, and again, hence I had to go sit down and talk to the auditor, because a lot of people were like, "Oh, you'd be perfect for this."
Yes.
There's a lot of work, and I don't know if I want to do that. So
and responsibility.
Yes,
there is
a lot
a
of
whole lot of
responsibility.
responsibility that comes with that role, and especially when you said you do training, you're raising awareness, and those are such heavy commitments, right?
Yes.
So when you were training the police services, what did that entail? What kind of training? What kind of cultural appropriate training were you giving to them?
Well, it was raising awareness about the Indigenous history. Everything from contact treaties, the initial friendship treaties, right through to 60 Scoop, residential school, intergenerational trauma, all the various things that help them understand what it is they're seeing in the community sort of within their 12-hour shift and the things that they have to deal with. And by sharing that information with them, it gave them a better perspective and to a degree more empathy in how they deal with the Indigenous community. Because as being a hub, we actually have a higher population of Indigenous people here than, say, another area in Ontario or in Canada. And also part of the conversation was to get their perspective on what they have to deal with, what they see, their interpretation of that, and just kind of have that difficult conversation. Is like when you see something, in a 12-hour shift on a regular basis, day in and day out for a couple of years, it starts to jade your perspective. So part of my role at that particular time was just to help sort of open and broaden that perspective, so that, even though this is what you're seeing, there's reasons why you're seeing it.
There's some context, there's some other experiences, perspectives.
Exactly.
So James, in your work, and you've done so much in the community, you're so deep-rooted, do you get an opportunity to meet non-Indigenous people, like, we are getting a lot of immigrants into our community.
Yes.
There's influx of immigrants, new refugees coming in, racialized communities, BIPOC communities,
Yes.
Asian communities. If we have to, and most often, James, we come with not so much exposure to Indigenous issues
Yes.
nationally and specifically to our region, even Thunder Bay, if you may say so.
Right.
So when you come across, non-Indigenous people from a racialized community, what kind of learnings you would like to impart to them?
Some of the things just really try to find a better understanding of where you are. One, geographically, because usually for the most part, you'll be on somebody's traditional territory. So that means before Canada was even here, there was a group of Indigenous people that occupied or, traversed throughout this territory, depending on where you are. And just understanding that and what that means, understanding that there are issues here. There is a dark shared history that, to a degree, and I'm not sure exactly what the orientation is when you become a Canadian citizen or when you immigrate here. My understanding is that it's not a very in-depth, this is our history, this is sort of what's going on. It's more like, welcome to Canada, and these are your responsibilities, and there you go. So really understanding who your neighbors are and not to be afraid to talk to them. I had a conversation actually just the other day, and somebody was mentioning that, pretty much the view that new people to Canada get are either from Hollywood or a little bit in the history books or whatever, and that's very, very sort of one-sided, one view depending on who created the content. So yeah, the idea of understanding who your neighbors are, being open and willing to connect with them and just communicate with them, just so you have a better understanding of who they are, and they have a better understanding of who you are, because this is, especially for this area, the influx of people we've had over the last 5 years has really, really changed. And as you said, with the various demographic of people that are coming in now, and it helps for Indigenous people to understand you and your culture and where you come from. And one thing that I do try to stress with people, especially when you're new here, is look at your own history in the country that you came from. There's a lot of similarities here. You, to a degree, you should understand oppression, marginalized people, racialized people, etc. Right? So to that degree, it's the same but different because it happened here, and the original people are still here.
True.
So it's just kind of finding that balance. But for the most part, it's like just get to know your neighbors. Get to understand where you are and who you are and what's going on in the region.
James, we'll take a very short break and we'll be right back. And I want to get to know you more better. Dear viewers, stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hello viewers, welcome back to Global Vibes. James, you were mentioning about land acknowledgement. Yes. Can you help me understand that a little bit more?
I guess it goes back to our previous conversation about sort of where you are and understanding that there have been people here for like tens of thousands of years traversing this land, interacting with the land, and from various different communities. So where you are, like here in Thunder Bay, we're on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people and the treaty territory of Fort William First Nation. So essentially, the simple explanation is you can't have a party in somebody's backyard without acknowledging them, because apart from being rude, it's just protocol. And acknowledging that there were people here before Canada even became a country is very important in the relationship, because it helps you better understand the history and significance of the Indigenous people that you encounter here. So whether it's a gathering at the beginning of a meeting, etc., just acknowledge that you are living, loving, and learning and working on somebody else's traditional territory. And just being able to acknowledge that really shows that you have concern and awareness that you actually are a visitor to this area.
And yeah, visitor. And as a visitor or as someone who's made Canada a home, how do we learn more about Indigenous people? Where do we get that learning from? How do we connect with the Indigenous friends? Of course, if you have a colleague sitting next
Yeah.
to your room, so that's an easy access. But how else can we learn more about Indigenous cultures and the teachings that comes with the Indigenous cultures?
There's a lot of resources online that you can learn from. Again, depending on the territory that you're in, sometimes it's better actually just to engage the community. You know, like somebody from Fort William First Nation, or there are friendship centers here. There are different organizations that are here, and just finding out sort of where different things are happening. Whether it's a powwow, like we just had a family day powwow at the Victoria Inn at the beginning of the month, and February 20th,
February, yeah.
and you know, those types of events everybody's welcome to. So just come in and start developing relationships and friendships and just interacting with people. And if you have questions, you know, gently ask your questions, and somebody will probably guide you to the proper way to ask questions and what the protocols are and stuff. So it's really better that you actually learn it firsthand from somebody who is Indigenous, rather than, you know, the perspective of, you know, well, I read in this book that, you know, and it's like, 'cause that leads to its own issues. But yeah, it's you know, whether it's a colleague, whether it's a classmate, or whether it's your neighbor or somebody in the community that you've managed to, you know, develop a friendship with, you know, have the patience to get to that point where you can ask questions, and then we'll be happy to share information with you.
And many a times there are negative narratives that you hear and you get influenced. Yeah, but again, that learning part, and sometimes it's the responsibility lies on us as well.
It's-
Take that responsibility to, learn a little bit more, raise your own awareness, be mindful, be respectful, right?
Yes, definitely. And you know, the point I made earlier about looking at your own history from your own country, from where you've come from, understanding
I really like that. Yes.
everything, like a lot of those things have already explained to you because you've already lived that experience. So when you see or hear things in relation to Indigenous people, use that filter to filter that information, and kind of do your own research and find out things for yourself, because what's portrayed is not always what the case is. That's not always the truth.
James, you also mentioned about protocol. Is there something, I don't know anything,
Yeah.
but is there something that I should follow to begin with to, just learn a little bit more about the Indigenous people and cultures in terms of protocol?
In terms of protocol, to even learn about protocol, it really starts with your name and where you're from.
Oh, okay.
And when you're talking to somebody, it's like, you know, I'm James, I'm from Southern Ontario, you know, now I'm here in Thunder Bay, and this is the path I follow. Who are you? Nice to meet you. And that's how people meet and begin a conversation. So that's sort of the beginning of your protocols. Just introduce yourself with an open heart and an open mind, and people will be more receptive to you.
Yeah, and then sometimes that becomes a little confusing for you've made Canada your home, but you've also you have a home elsewhere,
Yes. Yeah.
and that explanation becomes a conversation by itself.
Yes. Yeah.
James, you said about website. Do you have a lot of resources in your website as well? The City of
Yes,
Thunder Bay's.
the city of Thunder Bay has in the Indigenous Relations section of the website, there's a bunch of resources, and our community partners, there's links there so you can get information there. There's also the public library, there's the Indigenous Friendship Center. There's quite a few organizations in town that you can find information out about. And just by participating in, like say, we have like maybe 3 powwows a year, National
That's
Indigenous.
organized by the
Yeah,
city?
yeah. Well, actually, by the city or community groups
Okay.
within the city.
Right.
And attend one of those. Take a moment to talk to somebody and ask questions. There's also people with information booths there as well. So these are all resources that are available in the community that you can utilize to start getting some information.
And James, you were talking about building relationships. So, what are the other organizations that you have to work with in your current position, like Thunder Bay Multicultural Associations, or is there um, any other community organizations that you interact with?
Yes, there's the Regional Multicultural Youth Association or Youth Organization that deals with youth, and they're all from all walks of life. It's an amazing group of people there. We deal with the high schools, the public schools, and like I said, the Indigenous Friendship Center, the public library. There's we have probably, I think, 33 or 35 Indigenous partners that have organizations
Okay.
within the community. So there's a lot of resources
Through
there.
the through those tribal councils and their
Yeah.
organizations, right? And you've brought up youth several times, James.
Yes.
Yeah, development, and in terms of development, in terms of interaction, engagement, and why is that so important to
Youth,
you?
youth is important from the aspect of, fortunately, youth don't have as much added stuff on
The
in their
baggages.
head, in the baggage, that adults carry. And some of their perspectives are skewed only because of some of the stories that they hear or some of the things that they see in social media, etc. So getting them to understand where they are and who they are really helps them develop their own perspective on what they're seeing and what they're being told, etc. And they learn to discover things for themselves. And youth are the role that I take on is more of a mentor role, and that's more of I pay it forward from how I grew up. Key people were placed in my path to help guide me onto the good path rather than sort of wander off. And whatever opportunities I'm have come my way, I take that
You take it
chance
on.
and I give that back.
Thank you so much, James. I know there's so much more to learn, so much more to know,
Yeah.
but I really appreciate your time to come and speak to us about these important cultural learnings. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, James, and all the best for all that you do for the community as your position in your position. Thank you very much.
Good for having me.
Thank you so much, dear viewers. Thank you for staying tuned to listen to Global Vibes and to meet James Wilkinson, the City of Thunder Bay's Indigenous Relations Liaison. Till we meet again, stay well.